Greetings and good Sunday afternoon. It is approximately 12 o'clock, 1200 for you motivators, on the 12th of May, still the third decade of the 21st century. If you're new to my channel, it's your first time and you're like, why is he saying that? Well, from my perspective, somebody who's a Gen Xer, born in the 70s, raised in the 80s, reached adulthood in the 90s, growing up, a lot of people had hypothesized where we would be as a society by the 21st century, let alone the third decade of the 21st century. And I always say that because it's like, what are we really dealing with? What sort of topics are we really dealing with? And, that's just kind of like, here's a topic, I'm gonna discuss it. You're free and clear to, respond if you want and create the conversation. But let's just keep in mind, are we really progressing? Are we really moving forward as a society? I mean, we don't have colonies on the moon or Mars or anything, but, we have biological males competing in women's sports, and only women are the ones adversely affected by this concept. We have, God only knows what's going on. I mean, any number of topics. And the one thing I will say is this. I recognize one thing as somebody who decided to put themselves on the internet. And for anybody who's kind of curious or interested, here's what I'll tell you. If you're going to take this risk, if you're going to push this envelope and put yourself out there like I have, hopefully you will suffer the same sort of internal introspective moment I had, which is, it's not so much as every time you point the finger there's three pointed back at you. It's, can you appreciate the fact that if you think a certain way, if you feel a certain way, if you believe a certain way, that it's entirely possible that if you also think you're a good person, there's other people who can think differently, and they can also believe that they're good people, and for all intents and purposes they could be good people. You just disagree. But we're at a point in the third decade of the 21st century where if you disagree, then it's full-scale warfare. And I think a lot of people, and I don't know if any of my veteran friends would agree, a lot of people who think that way may have never done our job for a living, and trust me when I tell you, war is not what you want. All right, full-scale violence is not what you want. Trust me when I tell you, you don't want what you wish for. But that being said, this whole dehumanization, this whole demonization of people. And so one of the goals of my channel, of this particular channel, not my nerdier channel, hope you like the new background, was to attempt to create conversations with people, with complete strangers, people I don't necessarily agree with, and be like, okay, well, First Amendment allows us the ability to express ourselves. It allows us the ability to communicate, so why not take advantage of that? The other reason I started my channel, to kind of give people some background, is after serving 20 years in the military, after losing my son, I'm a firm believer that we are the sum total of our experiences, and those experiences are both the things that we have some control over and the things we don't have control over. Experiences that are produced by our decisions, both good and bad. It also affects on how we receive, process, and interpret information, and then deal with that information. And I retired from the Marine Corps in February of 2015 after having served 20 plus years, and then 7 days later my son passes away. I had to make some sacrifices in the Marine Corps, to include sacrificing my career in order to try to keep my family together in conjunction with my son's poor health. And he would pass away shortly thereafter, kind of like the immediate response was like, well, that was all for nothing. But it's weird how the mind and the body reacts when something horrific happens. I eventually sought out the use of a therapist because I was starting to get into a position where I was spiraling. I was overly indulging in socio-political commentary, and I was kind of putting myself in my own personal echo chamber where everybody I was listening to and everybody I was surrounding myself with in podcast form and whatnot was just kind of reinforcing some of my own thoughts, and more importantly reinforcing my anger. So I sought out the use of a therapist because after everything I'd been through in life, I'm getting to this point where I'm very angry, and then on top of which I have a job where I also have to be able to present myself and conduct myself in a professional and, more importantly, neutral manner. What do I mean? Why does that always happen? At the 5-minute mark, what the? Anyways, I apologize. So one of the things I had to come to terms with, and I'm so glad that, you know, I've got the spouse that I do that helps me with these moments of clarity. If I can think a certain way, if I could put value on certain things, is it entirely plausible that somebody else could think differently and put value on different things? And then my wife hit me with the one truth that was like, you know, the necessary smack to the face. Ask yourself this: which group would you put yourself in, and which group would oppose you, and what did they do differently? And I had to look at her in a puzzling way, and she goes, theoretically, the people that would oppose you have become almost masters and experts at the use of using the tools at their convenience to demonize you, dehumanize you, you know, complaint forums, you know, all the different things that most people like me, we shrug things off. You know, we drink a beer, we go for a run, we go to the gym and lift heavy weights. You know, we do things that some people look as a positive means of purging anger, purging pent-up animosity, so that we can reach calm, we can reach levity, we can reach a good place. Other people, people that typically find themselves on the opposite side of people like me, their form is to leverage all the resources to try to tear you down, leverage all the resources to invoke excessive consequences. And I say this because, as it pertains to one of the subjects of 3 of my last videos, not that I want to rehash any of that, but one of my experiences was, whether it was me or somebody else, or I could see it from the outside, one of the worst things I've ever seen is when people when somebody doesn't like somebody, and somebody's in a position to adversely affect that person, and they never stop to think for 1 second, hey, it's not so much whether this person can do their job. It's not whether or not this person can physically earn their paycheck. I just don't like this person. So now I'm picking everything apart at the micro level to try to make things as bad as possible for this person. And now I'm going to go as far as to make a serious attempt to adversely affect this person's livelihood. This person is, you know, potentially a husband, a father. I apologize real quick. From my time in the military, I worked almost exclusively with men. I was infantry, so we were not integrated in any way, shape, or form at that time. So, all right. So this is potentially a loving husband, a loving father, you know, and for all intents and purposes, somebody who actually does the job. They can do the job, and they're doing the job. You just don't like them, or you don't like the way that they do the job, and you're taking it way too personal. Well, having seen all that, I can start to sort of understand the mindset of some people. Just, they can't see the forest through the trees, and it's like, no, we have to, you know, burn the ground. We have to burn everything to the ground, and then we have to salt the earth, you know, so that nothing can grow there anymore. And it's like, that's a rather long-term solution for a short-term gain. Like, that momentary sense of satisfaction you feel for long-term consequences, you know. But my whole point being is, I feel like part of the reason we get to that point is because we're not communicating with one another. We get stuck in these weird echo chambers where we reinforce each other, and we learn the art of demonizing and dehumanizing people. So I sought out a therapist to make sure that when I was on the platform, I can conduct myself in a neutral manner, so as in the event that there's 1 or 2 people in my class, because the law of 10% is always at stake, if there's at least 1 or 2 people in my class who are on that side of the coin where they do look for opportunities to be offended by everything, they do look for opportunities to be a victim of everything, and they know all of the resources at their disposal to cause harm and to cause excessive and unnecessary consequences, you have to protect yourself against them. During the COVID time period, long story short, my therapist would have to take a sabbatical and a leave of absence. Whether or not my therapist is back or not, I don't know, but I had to find something else. So I turned to YouTube, and YouTube, Rumble. One of the things I learned was that if you're gonna hit send on a video, you need to do your level best to consider all possible aspects, so that when you're communicating, you're doing your level best to communicate effectively while still maintaining your individuality and your individual thought process, but recognizing that other people may disagree. And have you at least done enough to look, I recognize you exist, I recognize you're out there, I don't agree with you, you don't need to drop a nuke in my backyard. Lately, in spite of all this other stuff, I was originally trying to make a video on like multiple topics, one of which was a few weeks ago. Alan Ritchson, who is the new Reacher character, was put on blast by somebody who may or may not be in law enforcement, but kind of came across as being overly sensitive, perhaps hypersensitive. That may not be right, but it's kind of like, well, what did Alan actually say? Apparently they were responding to an interview that he did for a magazine, and I was like, what did Alan say? And was it one of those things where, did he really say something that bad, or was he saying that, the sad reality is, for every 10 good cops, there's one good cop that, or there's one bad cop that, casts such a wide shadow that it leaves such a bad impression. And the only thing I can relate to is, if there's 1 million military members in the service, if the 10% risk is at play, that means 100,000 service members are bad actors and could potentially commit acts or do things that have severe repercussions against the other 900,000 military service members. That's just the reality of it. But I never got around to it because this other topic kind of took precedence. The only thing I can say on that is I've had such a hard time with this because, on one hand, if you're an entertainer, whether musician, YouTube personality, actor, whatever, what is your background and what skin do you have in the game, and who are you to tell anybody what to do? And again, not trying to be narcissistic or hubris in any way, shape, or form, but it's like, my experiences are mine. I essentially grew up what could be considered poor white trash from the southwest suburbs of Chicago. I had a little bit more than some, but there were plenty of others that had way more than me. Everything I've got, I've had to earn. I've been working ever since I physically could work. I've been paying taxes ever since I could earn a W-2. I've put the clothes on my back. I put the shoes on my feet. I put the food in my belly. The situation at home was just such that I had to do that. Why does my nose always itch whenever I'm on camera? Oh, somebody's going to have a field day with that. That was just my reality. So from time to time when I hear these things like white privilege, I'm like, what white privilege? What are you talking about? I never benefited at all from the color of my skin that I could be aware of. What I distinctly remember growing up in that area of the world is we still had ethnic neighborhoods. I remember growing up at a time where Heinz 57 was an insult, because if you couldn't claim a nationality or enough of a nationality, I think the farthest you could go was maybe 4. Like if your mom was 2 things and your dad was 2 things, at least, you're 25%. But the moment you fall below 25%, you're a Heinz 57. And that was an insult back in the day. Sorry, I had to pause things. My nose was driving me nuts. I remember ethnic neighborhoods where, there was like a certain protocol. You had to be escorted, or you had to be there specifically for business, or you just couldn't be there at night. I remember these things, and I don't know if anybody from that area, from that time frame, remembers these things, but that was my reality. That was my world growing up. I also remember growing up having a less than positive view of the South, the former Confederate States. I do remember that. I'm not going to shy away from that. But it has a lot to do with forging who we are. So a lot of times when I hear things and whatnot, I want to vent. I want to purge. And one particular thing I've been trying to deal with is this whole Trump trial. Because whether it's the Trump trial or just Trump in general, I've been trying to think for the life of me. There was once a point in time where, as a young single Marine, I just didn't care. All right, there was work, there was libo and tail. Um, you know, you did what you had to do at work in order to get to libo so that you can go chase tail. That was life. Politics, piss off. It wasn't until the invasion of Iraq that I came home from that, and all of a sudden, what it felt like, in all honesty, was a certain group of politicians were talking all this shit. And the way that it felt from my perspective, and I'm not saying I'm right, I'm just saying I feel what I feel. It felt as though they were attempting to invalidate everything we just did. So anybody that got wounded, anybody that was killed, was all for nothing. It was a bad decision, based on bad information, carried out by bad actors, and it felt like they were attempting to invalidate everything we did. The other day, my daughter was talking to me about this, and I explained to her the same thing. I was like, sweetheart, you don't have to agree. You don't have to like war. You don't have to join the service either. But for some of us that shed blood, for some of us that lost people, for some of us that had to put service members in a body bag and take them to that, remove them from the battle space, there's nothing worse than when people that don't have a dog in the fight, people that have never served a day in their life, elected people, elected positions for that matter, say things that come across as invalidating to your actions. So I'll just leave it at that. But I talked to my daughter, and I talked to my wife, and I talked to a few other people, and I try to ask questions like, okay, this whole Trump thing, I'm not saying anything is new. I'm not saying this isn't anything different. It feels different. It feels brand new because maybe it's the internet. Maybe it's the manner and the speed with which we can communicate information. I am only 48 years old. I haven't been around altogether that long. But in asking these questions and trying to gather information, I look at things and I'm like, okay, well, in previous years, when we study history, when we study the legacy of mankind, we typically speak in, say, centuries or groups of centuries, all right, where we don't always get down to the nitty-gritty, the decade by decade, the year by year. We measure it in these long-term things, basically longer than any one person can live, all right? That's kind of how we discuss the past. For the United States of America being such a young country, in contrast, we've been very fortunate to sort of discuss things not just by century but by decades and to some degree in years. However, whether or not history is written by the victors, I feel like from my perspective, and if somebody has a difference of an opinion, if somebody has something else they want to shed light on, that's exactly what this channel's for. I feel like for the first time in my recollection, I'm seeing the personal assassination of a political figure. And let's be very honest. It's not a matter of whether you like Trump personally. It's not a matter of whether you think he was a great businessman or not. On the surface, let's strip it down to what it is. You have a businessman who decided he wanted to get into politics because he didn't like what he saw. He didn't like the status of what was going on. And for whatever reason, if Obama was his own movement, if Obama was less of a political figure and more of an iconic movement, then Trump was kind of like the antithesis to that. Like, this guy took us in this direction, that may not have been the direction we need to go to, but so many people don't care about the direction, they just care about him, so we need to get back over here and get back to doing things this way. All I know is, if you're not familiar with me, for reasons of my own, I despise the Democratic Party. That does not mean I'm a Republican, all right? I would prefer additional parties. I would prefer having more choices than Republican or Democrat. For my own reasons, I can't be a registered Republican, but it's kind of like, hey, these are your choices. You're going to step in a massive pile of dog shit barefoot, or you're going to step in a smaller pile of dog shit barefoot. Can you give me some more context? Yes, the big pile of dog shit is going to be hot and runny, and it's going to go everywhere, in your toenails, you name it. The small one's going to be the small pile is going to be a hard turd, so easier to clean up. Oh, are those my only two choices? Is that my only choice? Can I not step in dog shit? Can I I don't know, can I step on a Lego maybe? No, those are your only two choices. Well, clearly I vote for the one I feel is the lesser mess. But I digress. This whole stuff going on with Trump, these character attacks, these character assassinations, for some of you perhaps not unlike what's going on with the whole SEAL stuff. Is this relatively new? Is this something that's been going on for decades, for centuries even? It's just, in my personal opinion, I feel like what's different is the exposure of what it is. The exposure that there is a tremendous amount of hypocrisy about how certain media outlets are literally carrying the water and doing the bidding of one political party over another. And in truth, because of my limited involvement up until a few years ago, crap, it's going on 20 years. Ugh. Because of how uninvolved I was, I can't honestly say that I've dedicated my life to researching this, so I don't know. But it just feels like right now that all the media apparatuses are showing their cards, like they're playing poker with the cards facing everybody else, you know, and they just don't care. It's like, what are you going to do? We are too big to fail. We are too big to give a shit. We are too big to worry about the consequences. This is 100% what we're doing. What are you going to do about it? And that's kind of how I feel. I feel like whether you like Trump or not, whether or not he's an awesome person or not, I feel like everything is being leveraged against him. It's out in the open that this is the plan. It's out in the open, like there's, you know, normally when it's clandestine, you try to keep the secrets and you try to, you know, be pervasive. In my opinion, nobody's being pervasive. It's like, oh yeah, we don't like Trump, so we're going to do everything we can to prevent this man from running for office. And I'm like, well, that's just wrong. Because technically speaking, in accordance with our country and our Constitution, he should be allowed to. Anybody should be allowed to. I mean, unless you don't meet the criteria, you should be allowed to run for office. And I just, to me, I find the hypocrisy scary. And I just don't know if it's always been there. It just hasn't been so out in the open. It hasn't been so obvious that there used to be a sense of discretion where if we're going to do the thing, we have to do it quietly on the down low so that it looks like we're doing the right thing, when in reality we're doing the wrong thing. Where now it looks like between the Democrats, the progressives, the liberals, the leftists, the media outlets, it's like, oh no, we're absolutely doing the wrong thing. What are you going to do about it? Well, I'm going to challenge. Well, that's because you're a white supremacist. That's because you're a nationalist. That's because you're a Zionist. That's because you're something else. I mean, you're talking about a group of people that's trying to normalize pedophilia. Well, they're just minor attracted people. No. That's wrong. You can't take wrong and then put a different label on it and call it right. And trust me, I know. Part of my job in the military was to put frosting on a dog turd and call it a cupcake. Trust me, I was not a fan of it. You can't just put frosting on a pedophile and call it a minor attracted person and all of a sudden it's a cupcake. I'm sorry. That pig's not going to be the prom queen. But this is the kind of stuff we're dealing with. This is the kind of crap and nonsense we're dealing with. And, you know, that's, you know, stuff and other things like that are kind of why I made this channel. Like, what the French toast? Am I the only one? And, you know, I've had from time to time one loyal viewer that had taken the time to respond. I got another buddy who, the same buddy that turned me on to this letter, that watches me on Rumble, and he responds on Rumble. But before I forget, one of you went to one of my other videos, watched it, left a comment, so as a man of my word, I need to respond. Frank J. Hey, hear from your Ramadi vid. In my opinion, the idea of legacy isn't a good enough reason to hate Democrats. Okay, I disagree, but you feel how you want to feel. Northern Dems didn't secede from the Northern Dems didn't succeed, and Northern Dems voted for civil rights, and not in any uncertain terms. Oh, and yeah, her name was Margaret Sanger, founder of Planned Parenthood. But eugenics was a common belief in this country 100 years ago. Even Teddy Roosevelt was a believer. Food for thought. I can elaborate my thoughts further by any medium you like. No indoctrination attempts, I promise, with a smiley face. Frank J., thank you for responding to this. Hopefully we can have some dialogue back and forth and people will get a kick out of it. But more importantly, we do have to have these conversations, especially if you and I do disagree. First and foremost, from my personal research, which is not like lengthy scholarly research that I would have done for a college paper, the Democratic Party was founded by the Confederacy and the Southern states when they seceded from the Union. Whether or not there were Democratic or Southern sympathizers that kind of formed their own Democratic Party up in the North, I'm not trying to dispute. The only video out of all of my videos that YouTube has ever removed is the one video I made where I actually put forth the research. I actually did the legwork, I did the research, and I discussed how the Democrats gained a foothold in the North. The man's name escapes me, but he was a Southern sympathizer. He was a Southern Democrat. He was basically the Northern version of a carpetbagger that moved up north, and he began to initiate these labor unions, and he was working with the poor whites to try to like rise up against the robber barons, so to speak, the rich industrialists, you know, the ones that helped fund the Civil War. It was kind of like his political contribution to helping the South rise again. He never once focused at all on quote-unquote non-white minorities. He focused specifically on the poor whites that were being taken advantage of by the rich industrialists, and that's how the Democrats got a foothold up in the North. Now, categorically, if you look at 1964 and 1965, the Civil Rights Movement, all right, the Civil Rights Vote, the Voting Act of 1965, those were categorically opposed, almost in unison, by the Democratic Party, which prompted the 23 Dixiecrats to contemplate leaving the Democratic Party. Of those, I think I got my numbers wrong again. I don't know why 23 sticks out. Of those, the only one that did leave and became a Republican was Strom Thurmond. Now, part of my other disagreement with the Republican Party is, in some way, shape, or form, I'm paraphrasing the crap out of this, whether it was the Reagan era or before, they decided to get in bed with the 700 Club, and they decided to make Christianity and whatnot their basis, like their core group for the Republican Party. And there's just certain things about the church that I may not necessarily agree with, that I think was kind of maybe a bad decision, where, you know, they completely, you know, allied themselves with a religious body. And again, I'm paraphrasing the crap out of that. That's not like, you know, cut and dry. But Frank J., by all means, get involved. You know, let's have this conversation. Yeah, I'm still just not a fan of the Democratic Party. Frank, if you're at all curious, you know, I don't know if I talked about it in that video because I don't listen to my own videos. A lot of my disdain towards the Democratic Party started with Bill Clinton. I was already a Marine in the service when he got caught having his affair with Monica Lewinsky. And this may not make sense to you, but at that point in time, any service member that was caught having an affair could be punished by the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's at the commander's discretion as to whether or not that service member can be non-judicially punished, so at the unit level without a court-martial, or whether or not that service member needs to be court-martialed. To some degree, the service member has a little bit of control. If the commanding officer attempts to do things at the unit level through non-judicial punishment and the service member declines and wants their day in court, the moment it goes to a special court-martial, if you lose, that's a felony conviction. So a special and a general court-martial results in a felony conviction, which means service members could have gone to special and general courts-martial over adultery, resulting in a felony conviction if they lost. And yet here's our president, who, among other things, hooks up with a woman who apparently doesn't have the discretion to hide the evidence. I'm trying really, really hard not to be crude, but hopefully you understand what I'm saying. And not only, you know, allowed the money shot to happen, but then kept the dress that the money shot was on, and bragged that this happened. And then our president was like, don't know what you're talking about. And then when he got caught, had the nerve to say, well, I thought that was like the female version of a handshake. You know, like, this is the guy that does not need congressional authority or congressional approval to send the Navy and the Marine Corps to go hurt somebody's feelings. That's our president, and that's when my whole thing with the Democratic Party began to begin. But holy crap, I've been going for 30 minutes. I need to shut the hell up. Frank J, by all means, please get involved in the conversation. Anybody else that wants to get involved in the conversation, by all means. I try to keep these short and concise. As far as my background goes, yes, obviously my time in the military has had an impact on how I view and receive the world. Perhaps the generation I grew up in has an impact on how I, view and see the world. We don't all have to agree. But if we don't talk to one another, if we don't try to recognize that we can see things differently, and then more importantly, try to recognize each other as people and try to find common ground, then the only other choice is to further seek division, to further divide ourselves. And God, pardon the turn of phrase, I sincerely hope it doesn't reach the culminating point where we draw lines in the sands and we put on uniforms and whatnot. So that's kind of my intent too. Is let's at least try to talk to one another. We can disagree. We can disagree passionately, but let's also not be like, well, you're just you're just less than human. You're not deserving in the DNA you possess. Other than that, look, I don't care about the likes or the subscriptions or the notifications or the ringing the bells. I'm really just trying to promote conversation of any kind. And if you do get involved, I do my absolute level best to read, react, and respond to all the comments. A couple of my previous videos had more comments than I'm normally used to. My last previous videos have gotten more views than I'm normally used to. If you actually go through and look at my history, I used to average between 1 to 2 or 0 views. I don't know if I've recently gone up, but that was my legacy. So if you get involved, I greatly appreciate it. Depending on the number of comments, I will do my level best to read, react, and respond. Stay safe out there. You're awesome.